Hello and welcome to Kerbal Space Program, Episode 3 with me, Proximace. So, this week we're going to carry on from our unmitigated disaster with the HMR Sparkle. So what we're going to do is now get back, try and get there in the same ship, but this time I'm not going to be using MechJeb. And here we are. Now, if you've watched the first two episodes, which were on recording session, you might notice a few differences, not to the ship, but one, the resolution is slightly higher, so it fully fits out from side to side of the screen, whereas before it was kind of nasty black bars. And also you can see my wonderful mouse, so you can see me just randomly waving it around for no reason, because I've managed to work out on the software how to make sure I capture this. So let's now try and use human power to get this into space. And lift off. So this is the same vessel, absolutely no modifications since last time. I've not touched this since I recorded last week's session. So we still have our nuclear reactor in there, which may and may not be a good idea, but hey, we'll go with it. Ooh, I don't want that. So again, I'm just going to speed this kind of bit up, because yeah, it's just going straight up it's quite dull. Well, if that's the moon, then what's that dot? Maybe it might be Minmus? It's a white dot. It could really be anything. It could be a bit of debris that's just in low orbit. But I think it's probably more likely to be Minmus, or, well, the sun's over there, so it's not that. Maybe one of the nearby planets? Well, we'll find out eventually. Okay, and we're coming up at the end of the first stage. So here's where the problem lies, is there enough thrust in general on this upper stage to even out the orbit at all? You know, it might not be that MechJeb was entirely incompetent, but I suggest he probably was quite a bit incompetent. And is it just the fact that there's not enough power on this section? That's a problem. Well, actually that might help us. Let's just leave that on and see how we're doing for altitude. Well, we're kind of almost getting into space on that altitude. And as the the debris recedes in the background, the main problem is stopping this engine from overheating. Well, look like we had spare takeoff capacity there, so that's great. We might be able to put more powerful engines on this upper section then, because we're not that much worried about weight. If we can actually get this one to engage with the lower section, that would be good. I might have been worried about this joint is not that brilliant, but you know, we'll see. Doesn't that look awesome? It's crazy that this thing is, I wasn't going to say allowed to fly, but it's just kind of crazy that it can actually take off. And you know, we're getting to the edge of the atmosphere, we're going to escape it, so it's just now a case of seeing, can we actually stay there? Because this doesn't need to be in a very high orbit, it just needs to be out of the atmosphere, and then we're going to use it as a docking station for all of the other bits, which we'll get onto as soon as this doesn't crash and burn. The best thing is we don't have to worry about any flimsy solar panels, because we've got the nuclear reactor in the middle there, so that's quite a good thing, because quite often when you come into dock you miss, or you just gently clip a solar panel and all of them fall off because they crash into each other. That's never a good thing. I'm kind of starting to come to the conclusion this just does not have the thrust required, because these fuel tanks are just not getting through them at all. It is going so, it's using such minimal amounts of fuel. Let's see what happens once we ditch this one when it's empty, and then put this up to full thrust. It's nearly at full thrust anyway, so I'm not sure it's going to make a huge amount of difference, but we shall see. Okay, that's quite a large delta V. We need to get quite a lot more speed, but it looks like this may actually be possible. but we're going to have to boost a lot earlier than it thinks we should. It is a majestic sight, but if it doesn't work, it's not entirely useful. It does look pretty sweet. And there we are. The human controller has prevailed where the computer could not. But that's only fair because it was a computer modelled on a Kerbal brain, not on my immensely powerful one. And there we go. A nice smooth circular orbit, and what I'm just going to do is going to set the moon as the target, and then when we come around to this side, just even out the angle of this, just so that we try and get it as close to it, zero as possible. There, that's close enough. But what we're going to do before then is, because we can probably make that zero just through very little thrust, we're going to ditch all of these, which still have a lot of fuel in. So we're just going to space them off and just gently thrust away from them using the ion engine here. There we go. Now that's the shape of our craft is kind of a bit weird. But if you were trying to make things look nice all the time, you'd never progress anywhere. So now we're waiting for this maneuver to come up. I'm going to just open up all of these docking ports, just so that I don't forget at a later point. So again, just a reminder, the idea is that we'll fly up kind of little attachment pods, maybe containing more fuel. You might have a pod of RCS tanks, and then a pod of battery and xenon and stuff like that, and then we can have some landers on the other ones, and we're going to use the arms to kind of capture them as they get close, so we can kind of just thrust them up right in front of the main head here, grab them with these arms using the cameras and the magnetic ends, and then just plop them down really close to these, and then as they're lined up, the magnets in these docking ports will pull them together, which will be great. Nice view over there of all of those extra fuel tanks, which are now going to be amazing debris to go into. So they're bringing the ion engine online, and you can see the electric charge generated by the nuclear reactor is sufficient to run it really quite well. When you have ion engines and solar panels, you have to, these standard small ones, not this huge one, but the tiny ones you get, you need one large and one small solar panel just to maintain the same rate of charging as discharging, just to use that one tiny engine. So this nuclear reactor really chunking out the power. So that's really very useful, because you could never power this size of it. You'd have to have like a whole ring of solar panels and masses of batteries just in case you went. Also, there's the advantage of this: it doesn't matter if you go behind a planet while you're orbiting, because you can still get power out. It's kind of a problem with using solar power, is when you're orbiting things, you'll naturally go into the shadow, and then you kind of can't use your engines because you're just going to run out of power, and then you just waste your gas for no reason. It does look really cool, and there we go. So now we should be in a nice, there we go, 0 degrees, 0 degrees. That's close enough. So now we're in a nice orbit. We're going to point this, using the RCS, towards north, and then we're also going to rotate it so it sits nice and level. And what this should do is that it should stop it rotating around too much, just because it's kind of balanced with the way it's rotating. It shouldn't kind of, go into a spin this way, or topsy-turvy, head over heels. So this should be nice and stable. So what I'm going to do now, before we leave this in space and go on to creating some of the pods to add to this, I'm going to just reposition these arms just so that we can get stuff to these ports and that they're useful. So we're going to fill up these two first, just because they're a little bit awkward with the arms. And there we go. Now looking like some kind of space crab with those tiny little feeler arms out the front. So let's get rid of this camera as well. And now, the important thing to do when exiting, you can hit to end flight. Don't hit end flight, because what I'll do is kind of terminate it. Go to Space Center, and it takes you back here, and you can always go to the tracking station and go up. So we can see here we've got the Sparkle orbiting, which is brilliant. The Exeter, if you remember the first episode, we managed to get the Exeter into space. Unfortunately, it's just the capsule, just kind of orbiting and stuck in space because we ran out of propellant. And there we go. And unfortunately, Bill Kerman, one of the 3-man crew, decided to run a very heroic and definitely suicidal mission to try and return back to Kerbal. It didn't really work for him, and these two guys don't appear to be that worried about it. That back there, that debris you can just see back there, that's the fuel tanks and so forth that we used to get into space. So I'm just going to leave them there. So now what we're going to do is, rather than make pods for our space station, which is kind of really going to be used once we start going out of the Kerbal system, is make a lander for first the Moon and then Minmus. So we're going to use the 3-crew command pod just because it's kind of useful to have more crew, because it means you can get out and wander around. And the kind of basic design, you know, is fairly standard. You just have, you know, a fuel tank, and then, you know, it's a descent engine, so it only needs to be one of these small ones because the gravity on the Moon is not that great. And then obviously you're going to want some lander legs for it to go down on. So that's kind of a basic design. We're not going to go for anything like that because we're doing this for fun. Why would we want something as boring as that? Yeah, what's that like? So I've got a couple of ideas in my head. We're going to run with them and see how it goes. And on with building! So what I'm sticking on now are these radial attachment points, and what these kind of enable you to do is, because if we take, to say, this random part, you can't attach it to this structural beam, but these radial points mount to anything, and they just give you a, you know, standard blubby attachment point, so you can stick whatever you need onto these. So I'm going to be mounting fuel and batteries and stuff on those. I know this is a lot of fuel to be adding to this lander, but my thought process here is, if we can get one lander which works really well, then we can probably, you know, just strap it to the front of our space station, fly it around and try and get it to land on other planets. That was my thought process. And ooh, whoops, get back on. Yes! Exemplary mouse skills there. Or not. But yeah, so some of them have higher gravity than the Moon, obviously because they're planets rather than moons, so they have a higher mass, they're going to have higher gravity. So I just thought, if we can kind of get a design that works pretty well, kind of has far excess amount of thrust that it needs to land on the Moon, then, you know, job's a good one. Don't need to do it again. I probably will, just because, you know, what's the fun in using a design you know works? Build a new one, try it. Watch it fail, build it better. And there we go, there's our lander. So let's name this as the What would be a good name for something as crazy balls as this thing has turned out to be? Well, seeing as our space station is the HMR, this is kind of just an ancillary to that, so we can't really, give that the HMR. So maybe we can just call it the SS for spaceship rather than for steamship. This is going to make a big hole in the ground, so let's call it the SS crater in the hope that that anti-jinxes it to crash. And if you believe that, I have a nice big statue to sell you. It's called Nelson's Column. Get it for £10,000. I'll ship it to you on Friday. Sweet. So now we're going to just add on some solar panels to keep the batteries charged. Going to add the mech jeb on it, just so that we can use it for the transfer burn to the moon, because I'm not particularly good at those. I can do them, but it generally takes me a couple of orbits to try and catch up with the moon, but mech jeb's pretty good at working out exactly when it can get around, so we're going to use that for this small purpose. So we just end that flight and get back to finishing this bit off and then sticking it to the top of probably what's going to be a very big and stupidly designed rocket, because why not? Can you tell I like this kind of cross design with a little bit in the middle and then most of the stuff around the outside? Hey, it looks awesome. What can I say? Let's actually just put a ladder here, just so that they can actually get down. That'd be nicer. They can actually want to get down to the surface of whatever that is. Because sometimes they can jump, but that may be too high depending on whatever gravity is. So that seems reasonable. We've got rocket thrust, we've got power, we've got power storage. We need some RCS fuel. Well, I know what's going on the top of these stubby ones now. Let's put these stupidly inside. This can only go great, right? I don't think I'm good enough to use good thrusters to actually move this thing around. It just kind of generally, if I can point it in a direction, that's all I need. Right, so let's go about attaching this thing to some kind of big stack of highly explosive rockets. Let's assume it gets off the launch pad at all. It could just disintegrate instantly. That's more common than you might think. Fortunately, we're not NASA. If NASA had a crash every 3 or 4 hours, people would probably start having any kind of confidence that they should be in charge of a lot of money and firing big things into the sky. Well, the people who live nearby anyway. The rest of us are probably not that bothered, to be honest, but I wouldn't like several hundreds of thousands of ton of highly explosive space debris landed on me. Now you can probably see that I'm having to place all of these kind of lower sections independently, and that's because of the way I did these struts on the top. Those struts are part of the Deep Space Missions pack, and as such they don't really work properly with the symmetry. You put that kind of central cube on, but then you can't like four-way symmetry the kind of spurs off it, and as such anything attached to those is a kind of separate thing. So rather than having multiples of 4 of the engines, I have each of the engines independently on the stage list. And also it's an absolute pain in the proverbials to put on these little strut connectors to make sure it doesn't all destroy itself, because you have to do them one by one. It's a good thing that for videos there's a fast forward button, but for me, I'm just going to sit back here listening to the smooth jazz and slowly click in one point, click in another, click on one point and click on another. Oh. Sorry, it's just so monotonous. Have this thing. Yeah, it's starting to be a bit crazy. So now we get these launch things. I'm going to need way more power on the bottom here, so let's get some solid rocket boosters. And there we have it, our weird, crazy, cross-shaped lander. I see, you can see I've kept the cross motif all the way down. I'm just kind of hoping the bottom section has enough power to get off and that the whole thing doesn't disintegrate on, well, putting it on the launch pad and engaging physics. Crash debris is already on the launch pad. Get rid of the debris. We can, salvage it or something. We'll leave that there for this week, and next week we'll start by taking off the SS crater and trying to get it round a decent orbit around the moon and then bring it down to a hopefully non-crater shaped landing. I've been Proximace, and I'll see you all next time.